They were gods walking among mortals until the day their own creator decided they had to die. The Thunder Warriors, humanity's first superhuman soldiers, conquered an entire world for the Emperor, only to discover that victory had signed their death warrant. What you're about to witness is the untold story of heroes who saved humanity, then paid the ultimate price when salvation made them obsolete. Mount Ararat's fortress crown blazed against Terra's poisoned sky, its ancient stones finally surrendering to the thunder of bolt shells and the screaming fury of Chain's wards. The last techno-barbarian stronghold was falling, just as every enemy of the Emperor had fallen before the relentless advance of his Thunder Warriors. But Captain Ghota of the IV cohort felt no triumph as he surveyed the carnage from atop the breached walls, only a growing certainty that something fundamental had changed in the war that had consumed his entire existence. 3 meters of enhanced bone and muscle wrapped in scarred ceramite plate, Ghota embodied everything terrifying and magnificent about the Emperor's first attempt at creating superhuman warriors. His storm-grey eyes, augmented far beyond mortal capability, tracked the movement of his gene-forged brothers as they secured the battlefield with mechanical precision. These were the warriors who had broken the Caucasus gene cults, who had purged the irradiated wastelands of the Indonesic bloc, who had united Terra's fractured tribes under the Golden Aquila through superior firepower and unshakable will. They were also dying. "The last world fortress has fallen, sir," reported Sergeant Barak, his bass voice filtering through a Vox grill that had been scarred by acid burns from a dozen different campaigns. The veteran's power armor bore the accumulated damage of the entire Unification Wars, las burns that would have killed unenhanced humans, bolt impacts that had been shrugged off through sheer genetic superiority, and acid scoring from enemies whose very blood had been weaponized against the Emperor's forces. But Ghota's enhanced senses detected what others might miss: the slight tremor in Barak's grip as he secured his bolt pistol, the barely perceptible favoring of his left leg as he moved between positions. These were symptoms that had been appearing throughout the Thunder Warrior ranks with increasing frequency, subtle signs of systemic failure in warriors who should have been virtually immortal. "Contact the fleet command," Ghota ordered, though part of him wondered why the routine felt different this time. "Mount Ararat is secure. The unification is complete." The words should have carried the weight of historical triumph. Terra stood united for the first time in millennia, its scattered tribes and techno-barbarian kingdoms finally brought together under Imperial rule. The age of strife was ending, and the promise of mankind's expansion to the stars could finally begin. But instead of celebration, Ghota felt only the growing dread of a warrior who had begun to notice patterns that others preferred to ignore. Around him, construction crews were already beginning work on the massive structure that would become the Imperial Palace, its golden spires reaching toward stars that the Emperor promised humanity would soon claim. But those same crews worked with careful efficiency around areas marked with biohazard warnings, sections of the construction site that hummed with energies suggesting purposes far beyond mere architecture. If you're ready to witness the most brutal betrayal in Imperial history, where loyalty is rewarded with extinction and heroes become specimens, then steel yourself for what comes next. The Thunder Warriors conquered a world, but they were about to discover that in the Emperor's grand design, even gods can become obsolete. Hit that subscribe button and join us in the darkness where the Imperium's greatest secrets are buried beneath mountains of classified records and forgotten graves. "Sir," came a new voice through the Vox channel. Tech Adept Viridian materialized through the smoke like a crimson spectre, his augmented form pristine despite the battle's fury. "Priority transmission from the Imperial Palace. All Thunder Warrior commanders are to report for immediate debriefing and reassignment." The message carried official authentication codes and priority clearances that superseded all other duties. But something in the tech adept's manner, a careful neutrality that suggested knowledge he wasn't authorized to share, sent warning signals through Ghota's enhanced nervous system. Reassignment to what? He asked, though he wasn't certain he wanted to hear the answer. The Emperor has new plans for his most faithful servants, Viridian replied, his synthesized voice carefully modulated. Great things await those who have served with such distinction. The pause before distinction lasted exactly 1.3 seconds, barely noticeable to unenhanced hearing, but perfectly clear to a Thunder Warrior's augmented senses. It was the hesitation of someone delivering news that couldn't be spoken aloud, implications that would have to be discovered rather than announced. As Ghota prepared to leave the battlefield that had seen the end of Terra's civil wars, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was also preparing for something far more final than reassignment. The unification was complete, and for the first time in decades, the Emperor's Thunder Warriors would not be needed for constant warfare. The question that gnawed at his enhanced consciousness was simple but terrifying. What happened to weapons when the war was over? The medical bay beneath the Himalaysian fortress complex hummed with the quiet efficiency of Imperial technology, its sterile corridors lit by the pale glow of lumens that never seemed bright enough. Captain Ghota moved through the recovery wards with growing unease, his enhanced hearing picking up the subtle wrongness that permeated the air, labored breathing, the irregular rhythms of struggling hearts, the quiet moans of warriors who had never shown weakness before. Brother Kazakh lay on a reinforced medical slab, his massive frame looking somehow diminished despite his 2.5-meter height. The Thunder Warrior's breathing came in shallow gasps, and his skin had taken on a grayish pallor that spoke of systemic failure. He'd been one of the strongest fighters in the 7 cohort, a warrior who could punch through ceramite with his bare hands and had once held a breach against an entire gene cult assault for 6 hours straight. How long has he been like this? Ghota asked the attending medic, a nervous-looking man in Imperial white who clutched his data slate like a shield. 3 weeks, sir. The symptoms began after the Ursh campaign. We've run every diagnostic we can, but the gene mods seem to be degrading. The medic's voice dropped to a whisper. It's not just him, Captain. We've had 17 cases this month alone. 17. Ghota's enhanced mind immediately began calculating percentages, cross-referencing the numbers against total Thunder Warrior strength. The results were disturbing. He moved to the next bed, where Sergeant Mordak from the war-teamed cohort lay unconscious, his breathing assisted by a mechanical respirator. Mordak had been a legend among the Thunder Warriors, the first to breach the gene forges of the Caucasus, the warrior who had single-handedly held the pass at Ararat's eastern approach. What does Command say about this? Ghota pressed. The medic's eyes darted nervously toward the security augers mounted in the corners of the room. Official diagnosis is combat fatigue, sir. Extended gene mod stress from prolonged warfare. The recommended treatment is rest and supplemental gene therapy. But Ghota could see the lie in the man's eyes. Combat fatigue didn't cause the cellular breakdown he was witnessing. This was something deeper, something built into their very genetic structure. He'd noticed it first in his own reflection 3 months ago. The faint lines around his eyes that shouldn't exist on a face engineered for eternal youth. The slight tremor in his hands during moments of rest. As he walked through the ward, Brother Captain Ushotan of the IV cohort fell into step beside him. Ushotan was a massive figure even among Thunder Warriors, his gene modifications more pronounced than most. His skull had been enlarged to accommodate enhanced cognitive processing, giving him an intimidating appearance that had earned him the nickname, the Reaper of Rust Town. You see it too, Ushotan said without preamble. The degradation, it's spreading through all the cohorts. Ghota nodded grimly. How many in your unit? 12 confirmed cases, maybe twice that showing early symptoms. The gene crafters say it's temporary, that they're working on treatments. Ushotan's scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. But I've seen how they look at us now, brother. Like we're specimens in a laboratory rather than warriors who bled for the Emperor's vision. They paused at another bed where Brother Thane, the same warrior Ghota had noticed struggling during the Ararat assault, lay connected to a forest of monitoring devices. His enhanced physique was visibly wasting away, the muscle mass that had made him a terror on the battlefield shrinking by the day. The medical chart at the foot of his bed listed dozens of failures: organ dysfunction, neural degradation, genetic cascade collapse. There's something else, Ushotan said, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. I've been monitoring the gene forges beneath the palace, new projects, massive resource allocation. They're building something, Ghota, something that requires genetic templates and enhancement technologies far beyond what they use to create us. The implications struck Ghota like a bolt round to the chest. The Emperor had always been known for his long-term planning, his ability to see potential futures that others couldn't imagine. If the Thunder Warriors were failing, if their genetic modifications were inherently unstable, then logically, "He's replacing us," Ghota said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Ushotan's nod was barely perceptible. The question is whether he'll simply wait for us to die naturally, or whether he has a more efficient timeline in mind. Above them, the fortress's Vox system crackled to life with a priority transmission. The voice that emerged was crisp, official, and completely without warmth. All Thunder Warrior commanders report to Briefing Chamber 7 immediately. Priority Alpha clearance required. The summons arrived through official channels, bearing the golden seal of the Imperial Palace and priority codes that superseded all other duties. Captain Ghota studied the data slate with the analytical mind that had served him well through decades of warfare, but something about the message's clinical precision sent warning signals through his enhanced nervous system. All remaining Thunder Warrior personnel are to report to Assembly Point Tertius within the Imperial Palace complex. Transportation will be provided via Valkyrie dropships beginning at 600 hours Terra Standard. No exceptions, no delays. Imperial order supersedes all current assignments. The phrasing troubled him. Remaining Thunder Warrior personnel suggested losses that went beyond normal combat attrition. Ghota's eidetic memory, another gift of his genetic modification, allowed him to recall exact numbers from the last official muster 6 months ago. 20,000 Thunder Warriors across all cohorts had answered that call. Recent casualty reports suggested no more than 15,000 remained combat effective. Brother Sergeant Arik found him in his quarters as he prepared his war gear, the veteran warrior's scarred face bearing the same expression of unease that had become common among their kind. "You received it too, then? The summons?" "Everyone has," Ghota replied, securing his bolt pistol in its holster with mechanical precision. "What does your instinct tell you about this gathering?" Arik was silent for a long moment, his augmented hearing picking up the sounds of movement throughout the fortress as other Thunder Warriors prepared for departure. "That we should have seen this coming. The unification is complete, brother. Terra stands united under the Aquila. The question was never whether we'd be needed for the next phase. It was whether we'd be allowed to see it." Through the armored windows of his chamber, Ghota could see the massive construction projects that had transformed the Himalaysian peaks into the foundation of the Emperor's palace. Towers of gold and adamantium rose toward the sky, their Baroque architecture speaking of an empire that would span the galaxy. But those same towers blocked the view of the gene forges hidden in the mountain's depths, where new projects consumed resources at an unprecedented rate. The Valkyrie dropship that collected Ghota's squad was piloted by a mortal crew who maintained careful silence during the flight. As they approached the Imperial palace, Ghota noted the increased security presence, not just human soldiers, but also the hulking forms of combat servitors and automated defense systems. The palace's landing platforms buzzed with activity as dozens of other dropships delivered their Thunder Warrior cargo. Walking across the ceramite landing pad, Ghota counted familiar faces among the arriving warriors. Captain Ushotan nodded grimly from across the platform. Brother Captain Jenniker of the 8th cohort moved with the careful gait of someone managing chronic pain. Sergeant Barak's limp had grown more pronounced in just the 3 days since Ararat's fall. The escort detail that met them consisted of regular Imperial Army troopers, mortal humans whose equipment and training represented the pinnacle of non-enhanced military capability. Their lasguns were held at parade rest, but Ghota's tactical awareness noted the positioning, the sight lines, the way the formation could quickly shift from ceremonial to combat deployment. "Welcome to the Imperial Palace," announced a tall figure in the crisp uniform of an Imperial aide-de-camp. "You are to proceed directly to Assembly Point Tertius. No deviation from the prescribed route. Personal weapons are to remain holstered at all times during transit." The route took them through corridors lined with murals depicting the Thunder Warriors' greatest victories, the breaking of the techno-barbarian tribes, the cleansing of the gene cults, the final assault on Mount Ararat. But something about the artwork struck Ghota as wrong. The figures in the murals were idealized, heroic, larger than life. They looked like monuments to the dead rather than celebrations of living warriors. As they walked, Brother Sergeant Arik moved closer. "Notice anything about our escorts?" he asked quietly. Ghota had indeed noticed. The Imperial Army troopers were all veterans, their movements speaking of extensive combat experience. Their equipment was the latest pattern, their armor bearing the modifications that indicated special operations training. This wasn't a ceremonial guard. This was a precision military unit prepared for close-quarters combat against enhanced targets. The assembly point itself was a massive chamber deep within the palace complex, its vaulted ceiling decorated with astronomical charts showing the galaxy beyond Terra's atmosphere. Thousands of Thunder Warriors filled the space, their voices creating a low rumble of conversation as old comrades reunited and shared news from different theaters of the Unification Wars. But even in this moment of reunion, Ghota couldn't shake the feeling that they were being gathered for something far different than celebration. The great assembly chamber filled with the voices of brothers in arms who had not seen each other for months, sometimes years. Thunder Warriors from every cohort mingled in the vast space, their massive forms creating clusters of animated conversation as old friendships rekindled and war stories were exchanged. Despite the underlying tension that gnawed at many of them, the gathering had the feel of a veterans' reunion. Warriors who had shared impossible hardships finding comfort in each other's company. Captain Ghota moved through the crowds, his enhanced hearing picking up fragments of conversation that painted a disturbing picture. Brother Korvac of the 3rd cohort described seizures that had claimed 2 of his squad mates during the final push on the Ursh territories. Sergeant Mordian spoke in hushed tones about memory lapses that left gaps in his recall of recent battles. The pattern was consistent across all units, genetic degradation manifesting in different ways but following the same inexorable progression. "Ghota!" The booming voice belonged to Captain Tyrannus of the 9th cohort, a giant even among Thunder Warriors whose exploits at the siege of the Tempest Galleries had become legend. "I wondered if you'd survived the Ararat assault. Heard your boys took the worst of the Gene Cult's final gambit." The 2 warriors clasped forearms in the traditional greeting, and Ghota was shocked to feel the slight tremor in Tyrannus's grip. The captain had always possessed strength that bordered on the mythical. He'd once torn the turret off a battle tank with his bare hands during the Nordafric clearances. Now his fingers shook with barely controlled muscle spasms. "We endured," Ghota replied carefully, "though I notice many of our brothers show signs of fatigue." Tyrannus's scarred face darkened. Fatigue. That's what they're calling it now. My apothecary says it's combat stress, that we've pushed our enhanced physiology beyond its design parameters. He leaned closer, lowering his voice to a rumble that only Ghota's enhanced hearing could detect. "But I've seen the medical reports they think we can't access. This isn't fatigue, brother. This is systematic failure." Nearby, a group of younger Thunder Warriors, those who had been inducted during the later phases of the Unification, shared stories of their recent victories with the enthusiasm of warriors who had not yet experienced the creeping doubt that plagued their veteran brothers. Sergeant Chiral of the 16th Cohort demonstrated the new combat techniques they'd developed for fighting in the irradiated wastelands of the Indonesic bloc, his movements still fluid and powerful. Brother Captain Ushatan approached their group, his massive frame moving with the careful precision of someone managing chronic pain. "Enjoying the reunion?" he asked, though his tone suggested anything but enjoyment. "I've been counting heads. We're missing nearly 30% of our original number." "Combat losses," Tyrannus suggested, though his voice lacked conviction. "That's what the official records show," Ushotan agreed. "But I've spoken with survivors from 17 different cohorts. The pattern is always the same. Warriors disappearing during medical treatment, brothers who report for routine genetic monitoring and never return to their units. The medical bays are full of our kind, but they're not treating injuries anymore." The implications hung in the air like the scent of ozone before a lightning strike. Around them, other conversations continued, but Ghota noticed that many of the veteran Thunder Warriors wore the same expression of growing unease. They had been created for war, their enhanced minds capable of processing tactical information at superhuman speeds. The same analytical abilities that made them devastating on the battlefield were now turning their attention to their own situation. "Still with us in the darkness?" Ghota thought grimly, remembering similar moments of terrible clarity during the most dangerous battles. The tension builds in ways we never expected. Brother Sergeant Arik joined their circle, his weathered face bearing news that none of them wanted to hear. "I've been talking to the escorts," he said quietly. "The troopers who brought us here. They're all volunteers from special operations units. Combat veterans with experience fighting enhanced opponents." The circle fell silent as the implications sank in. Thunder Warriors were not the kind of opponents that required special preparation unless someone expected trouble. The escorts weren't ceremonial. They were tactical assets positioned to contain a potential threat. "Brothers," Tyrannus said slowly, his voice heavy with realization, "I think we need to consider the possibility that we weren't summoned here for celebration. We were summoned here for something far more final." Above them, the chamber's Vox system crackled to life with a tone that commanded immediate attention. The voice that emerged was synthesized, mechanical, and completely without emotion. "All Thunder Warrior personnel prepare for address by the Master of Mankind, form ranks by cohort designation, maintain combat discipline at all times." The chamber fell silent as the Emperor entered, his presence preceding him like a wave of psychic energy that pressed against every mind in the vast space. Even the Thunder Warriors, with their enhanced neural conditioning and mental fortifications, felt the overwhelming force of his will. He stood nearly 4 meters tall, his form wreathed in a golden aura that seemed to bend light itself around his figure. This was the Master of Mankind, the being who had united Terra through superior intellect, ancient knowledge, and power that defied mortal understanding. The assembled Thunder Warriors dropped to one knee in perfect synchronization, 20,000 enhanced warriors acknowledging their creator and commander. Captain Ghota felt the familiar sensation of being in the Emperor's presence, a mixture of awe, loyalty, and something deeper that bypassed rational thought entirely. The genetic conditioning built into every Thunder Warrior compelled absolute obedience to this figure, but Ghota's enhanced mind still functioned beneath the surface, analyzing and questioning even as his body performed the ritual of submission. "Rise, my Thunder Warriors," the Emperor commanded, his voice carrying easily across the massive chamber without amplification. "You who have served as my instruments of unity, who have bled and died to forge Terra into the foundation of an empire that will span the galaxy." The warriors rose as one, their movements precise despite the various injuries and symptoms that plagued so many of them. Ghota found himself studying the Emperor's face, searching for some hint of the man's intentions. The master of mankind's features were perfect in their symmetry, ageless in a way that spoke of technologies beyond current Imperial science. His eyes, when they swept across the assembled ranks, seemed to see through to the very genetic structure of each warrior. "The Unification Wars are ended," the Emperor continued, his words carrying the weight of historical inevitability. "Terra stands united under the Imperial banner, its scattered tribes and techno-barbarian kingdoms brought together under a single purpose. You have accomplished what mortals deemed impossible, and for this, you have earned a place in history that will never be forgotten." The praise should have filled them with pride, but Ghota noticed the careful phrasing. A place in history suggested something that belonged to the past rather than the future. Around him, other veteran Thunder Warriors seemed to reach the same conclusion, their enhanced minds passing the subtext beneath the Emperor's words. "But unity of Terra is merely the first step in humanity's destiny," the Emperor said, his voice rising with the passion of a prophet describing divine revelation. "Beyond our atmosphere lie 10,000 worlds waiting to be claimed. The Great Crusade will carry the Imperial truth to every corner of the galaxy, bringing order to the chaos that has consumed mankind since the dark age of technology." Images formed in the air above them, holographic projections showing star charts, alien worlds, and the vast fleets that would carry humanity to the stars. But the armies shown in these visions were different from the Thunder Warriors. Ghota's enhanced vision picked out details that made his enhanced heart skip a beat. The soldiers in these projections were larger, more perfectly formed, their armor more advanced than anything the Thunder Warriors had ever worn. "The Great Crusade will require warriors suited to the challenges of galactic conquest," the Emperor explained, his golden eyes seeming to focus directly on Ghota, despite the thousands of other warriors present. "The gene craft that created you was the first step in this process, a prototype that taught us invaluable lessons about the enhancement of human potential." Prototype. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. Brother Captain Ushotan's assessment had been correct. They were being replaced. The Emperor's next words confirmed their worst fears. "Through your service and sacrifice, we have perfected the process of creating enhanced warriors. The Legiones Astartes, the Space Marines, represent the culmination of that research. They will carry the Imperial banner to distant stars and bring the light of civilization to worlds that have known only darkness." The holographic displays shifted, showing these new Space Marines in greater detail. They were magnificent, perfectly proportioned warriors whose armor integrated seamlessly with their enhanced physiology. Where Thunder Warriors were crude instruments of war, these Astartes appeared to be works of art as much as weapons. Their genetic modifications were clearly more stable, their equipment more sophisticated, their very existence a testament to everything the Thunder Warriors were not. "Your legacy lives on in these new warriors," the Emperor said, his voice taking on a tone that might have been meant as comfort. Every Astartes carries within him the lessons learned from your creation, the knowledge gained from your service. You will not be forgotten." But Ghota had spent too many years analyzing the Emperor's words to miss the implications. Legacy, past tense, knowledge gained from their creation, not their continued existence. The terrible truth was finally in the open. The Emperor's address concluded with ceremonial words about service and sacrifice, but Captain Ghota barely heard them. His enhanced mind was already processing the implications, calculating survival scenarios, and assessing the tactical situation with the cold precision that had kept him alive through decades of warfare. Around him, 20,000 Thunder Warriors maintained parade discipline, but he could sense the subtle tension radiating from the veteran ranks, warriors who had reached the same terrible conclusions. As the Emperor departed, leaving them under the supervision of Imperial officials and their heavily armed escorts, Ghota felt a familiar weight settle in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd experienced before every major assault during the Unification Wars. The knowledge that death was approaching and that only preparation and brotherhood would determine who survived to see another dawn. The dismissal came in stages, with different cohorts being escorted to separate quarters throughout the palace complex. It was a standard military procedure for managing large numbers of personnel, but Ghota recognized the tactical wisdom behind it. Divided forces were easier to control, and the Thunder Warriors were being systematically separated from their natural command structures and mutual support networks. Brother Captain Ushotan managed to fall into step beside him as they were led through corridors that seemed designed more like containment facilities than guest accommodations. "Did you see the escort formations?" he asked quietly, his voice pitched below the hearing range of their human guards. Ghota had indeed noticed. The Imperial Army troopers weren't just veterans. They were specialists trained in close-quarters combat against enhanced opponents. Their equipment included exotic weapons that he didn't recognize, devices that hummed with barely contained energy. More disturbing were the figures in red robes who shadowed their movement. Tech adepts, whose augmented forms suggested capabilities far beyond standard Imperial technology. "They're not taking any chances," Ghota replied. "Whatever they have planned, they've prepared for resistance." Their assigned quarters were in a section of the palace that had clearly been constructed for housing enhanced personnel. The corridors were wider than standard Imperial architecture, the ceiling heights accommodated their enhanced stature, and the reinforced walls could probably contain even a Thunder Warrior's superhuman strength. It was comfortable, well-appointed, and utterly secure, but it was also a prison. Ghota's chamber included access to a data terminal, supposedly for reviewing operational reports and maintaining contact with Imperial command. But when he attempted to access medical records or personnel files, he found his clearance had been revoked. The system that had once granted him access to virtually any non-classified information now treated him as a potential security risk. More disturbing was what he could access. His personal file now contained notations that made his enhanced blood run cold. Genetic degradation confirmed. Projected lifespan, 18 to 24 months. Recommend immediate reassignment to non-combat roles pending final disposition. Final disposition. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise the reality. They were being marked for elimination. A soft chime indicated an incoming Vox transmission. The caller was Brother Sergeant Arik, but his image on the screen showed signs of distress that went beyond their current situation. "Ghota," he said without preamble, "I've been reviewing the medical data they gave us access to, the gene template files, the enhancement protocols, all of it. And? The degradation isn't a flaw in our design," Arik said, his voice heavy with terrible understanding. "It's a feature. They built us to fail, brother. The genetic modifications that make us superhuman also contain predetermined termination sequences. We were designed to die. The words struck Ghota like a physical blow. Everything they had endured, every battle they had fought, every brother they had lost, all of it had been predicated on a lie. They weren't flawed prototypes that had unexpectedly begun to fail. They were disposable weapons with built-in obsolescence. "How long have you known?" came another voice. Brother Captain Ushotan had somehow accessed their conversation, his scarred face appearing in a secondary window on the screen. "I suspected during the later campaigns," Arik admitted. "The pattern was too consistent to be natural degradation, but I hoped—" He trailed off, unable to voice the desperate hope that had sustained them through the growing evidence of their mortality. "The Emperor knew," Ghota said, the words tasting like poison. "He knew from the beginning that we would die, that our bodies would fail, that we were never meant to survive beyond the unification." Ushotan's expression hardened into something that resembled his old battlefield demeanor. "Then we have a choice to make, brothers. We can accept this fate with the dignity they expect from us, or we can remind them why they created us to be weapons in the first place." Through his chamber's reinforced window, Ghota could see the lights of the Imperial Palace stretching into the distance. Somewhere in those corridors and laboratories, the Emperor's new warriors were being prepared for the great crusade that would carry humanity to the stars. The Space Marines would inherit the galaxy that the Thunder Warriors had won for them, but they weren't dead yet. The revelation came 3 days into their confinement, delivered through channels that should have been impossible for Thunder Warriors to access. But Brother Sergeant Arik had always possessed a talent for extracting information from reluctant sources, a skill honed during the intelligence-gathering phases of countless campaigns. What he showed Ghota and Ushotan in the secured data chamber would have broken the spirit of lesser warriors. The holographic displays filled the room with technical specifications, genetic templates, and enhancement protocols that represented decades of research and experimentation. At the center of it all were the Astartes, the Emperor's new Space Marines, rendered in perfect detail that showcased every improvement over their Thunder Warrior predecessors. "They call it the Astartes Project," Arik explained, his voice carefully controlled despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. 20 distinct genetic modifications integrated into a stable template that won't degrade over time. Enhanced healing factors, additional organs, psychological conditioning that ensures absolute loyalty. Everything we were, but perfected. Ghota studied the anatomical diagrams with the analytical mind that had made him an effective military commander. The Space Marines possessed 2 hearts instead of the single enhanced organ that sustained Thunder Warriors. Their bones were laced with ceramite compounds that made them virtually unbreakable. Their blood contained specialized cells that could seal wounds and neutralize toxins automatically. "Look at this." Ushotan pointed to a section detailing the Astartes recruitment process. "They're not creating them from adult volunteers like us. These new warriors are recruited as children, their bodies modified during growth phases to ensure perfect integration with the genetic enhancements. The implications were staggering. Where Thunder Warriors were created quickly and in large numbers to meet the immediate needs of the Unification Wars, the Astartes represented a long-term investment in humanity's future. Each Space Marine required years of preparation, surgical implantation, and psychological conditioning. They were being designed not just as soldiers, but as the foundation of a galactic empire. "The gene seed," Arik continued, highlighting another section of the data. "Each Astartes carries genetic material that can be harvested after death to create new warriors. They're not just individually superior, they're self-perpetuating, a legion that can replace its losses indefinitely." Ghota felt something cold settle in his enhanced chest as he processed this information. The Thunder Warriors had always known they were mortal, that their enhanced physiology came with costs that would eventually claim them. But seeing the elegant solution that would replace them drove home the temporary nature of their existence in ways that mere genetic degradation could not. "Here's what they don't want us to see," Arik said, calling up another set of files. The test subjects, early Astartes prototypes that were used to refine the enhancement process. The holographic records showed laboratories deep within the palace complex, sterile chambers where figures in medical robes worked on subjects strapped to surgical tables. Some of the test subjects were volunteers from the Imperial army, their faces showing the hope and determination of soldiers eager to serve. Others were clearly Thunder Warriors, brothers who had reported for routine medical treatment and never returned to their units. "They've been using us," Ushotan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Our genetic material, our enhancement patterns, our very bodies, all of it harvested to perfect their new creations." The files contained detailed analyses of Thunder Warrior physiology, genetic templates extracted from living subjects, and surgical notes describing the extraction of organs and tissue samples. Brothers who had served faithfully for decades had been reduced to raw material for the Emperor's new project, their sacrifice uncredited and unremembered. Comment your theories below. Ghota thought bitterly, remembering the propaganda broadcasts that had promised glory and immortality to those who served the Emperor's vision. What corruption stalks our heroes when the corruption comes from within? Arik brought up the final set of files, production schedules and deployment timelines for the Astartes legions. 20 distinct genetic lineages, each designed for specific combat roles and tactical doctrines. The numbers were overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of space marines already in various stages of creation, with production facilities that could generate warriors at an unprecedented rate. "They don't need us anymore," Ghota said, the words carrying the finality of a death sentence. "We've served our purpose as both weapons and test subjects. Now we're just a liability, veterans who know too much about the Emperor's methods and possess the strength to potentially cause problems. Look at this final notation." Ushotan pointed to a timestamp at the bottom of the file. "All data classified under Project Terminus. Scheduled implementation, 72 hours from initial briefing." Ghota's enhanced mind immediately began calculating. The Emperor's address had been 3 days ago. Project Terminus, whatever it entailed, was beginning now. Around them, the palace complex hummed with activity that took on a more sinister aspect when viewed through the lens of this revelation. "They're not going to wait for us to die naturally," he realized. "They're going to accelerate the process." The first Thunder Warriors to die weren't eliminated by weapons or betrayal. They simply never woke up from what was supposed to be routine medical monitoring. Brother Korvac of the 3 cohort was found in his quarters at dawn, his massive frame peaceful in death, his enhanced physiology finally surrendering to genetic cascade failure that had been artificially accelerated. The official cause was listed as natural complications from combat fatigue. Captain Ghota stood over his brother's body in the medical bay, studying the telltale signs that spoke of deliberate intervention rather than natural death. Korvac's skin showed the distinctive discoloration of cellular breakdown, but the pattern was too uniform, too systematic to be the result of random genetic degradation. This was engineered failure, precise and clinical in its execution. 17 more since yesterday, reported Brother Sergeant Arik, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a warrior who had finally recognized his true enemy. All listed as medical complications, all Thunder Warriors who had been scheduled for enhanced gene therapy sessions. The pattern was becoming clear with each passing hour. Imperial medical staff would identify Thunder Warriors showing advanced symptoms of genetic degradation. Symptoms that every surviving warrior now understood had been designed into their very DNA. These brothers would be called for special treatment, promised relief from the pain and weakness that plagued their enhanced bodies. They would report to medical facilities deep within the palace complex and simply disappear. The gene therapy chambers, Ushotan said grimly, reviewing the data they had extracted from restricted Imperial files. They're not treating the degradation, they're completing it, accelerating the termination sequences built into our genetic template. Ghota's enhanced hearing picked up the sounds of movement throughout their secured wing of the palace. Imperial army troopers were taking positions at key intersections, their equipment including weapons specifically designed for use against enhanced targets. Tech adepts moved through the corridors with mechanical precision, their augmented forms bristling with devices that hummed with barely contained energy. They're moving to the next phase, he observed. Passive elimination was never going to be sufficient for 20,000 Thunder Warriors. Too many variables, too much potential for resistance. The truth was that some Thunder Warriors had already begun to resist. Brother Captain Ghota of the 8th Cohort had barricaded himself in his quarters when the medical summons arrived, his tactical mind recognizing the threat despite decades of conditioned loyalty. Sergeant Mordian had attempted to access restricted areas of the palace, seeking evidence of what had happened to his missing squad mates. None of them had been seen since. "Listen," Arik said, his enhanced hearing detecting something that made his scarred face go pale. Vox traffic on the command frequencies. The intercepted communications painted a picture of military efficiency applied to genocide. Imperial forces were receiving orders to implement Directive Omega, a systematic sweep of all Thunder Warrior quarters designed to ensure complete compliance with medical protocols. Any warriors who resisted would be classified as suffering from combat-induced psychosis and subdued for immediate treatment. Treatment, Ushotan repeated, the word carrying bitter irony. They can't even call it what it is. Through his chamber's reinforced window, Ghota could see squads of Imperial army troopers moving into position around the Thunder Warrior residential areas. Their formation was textbook urban pacification, overwhelming firepower applied with surgical precision to minimize collateral damage while ensuring total success. These weren't guards anymore. They were executioners preparing for mass murder. "Brothers," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had commanded respect throughout the Unification Wars. "We have a choice to make. We can die quietly in medical chambers, sedated and compliant while they harvest our genetic material for their new warriors. Or we can die as Thunder Warriors, fighting to the last breath and reminding them why they created us to be weapons." The response came not in words, but in the distinctive sound of power armor systems activating throughout the secured wing. 20,000 Thunder Warriors had been brought to the Imperial Palace under false pretenses, told they were being honored for their service while actually being prepared for elimination. Many would die. Perhaps all of them would die, but they would not go quietly into the darkness. "Still with us in the darkness?" Ghota thought, remembering the battles where impossible odds had been overcome through brotherhood and determination. Hit that like button if this tale chills your soul, because what comes next will chill the very foundations of the Imperium. Arik's fingers danced across his data terminal, uploading their discoveries to every Thunder Warrior unit that still maintained communication access. Within minutes, the evidence would spread throughout their ranks. Proof of the Emperor's betrayal, documentation of their designed obsolescence, and tactical intelligence about the forces being deployed against them. The war for survival was about to begin, and it would be fought in the corridors of the very palace they had died to build. The killing began at precisely 0300 hours, when Imperial forces launched coordinated strikes across 17 different sectors of the Thunder Warrior residential complex. Captain Ghota was already awake when the first explosions shook the reinforced walls of his quarters, his enhanced senses having detected the subtle changes in air pressure and electromagnetic fields that preceded military action. Brother Captain Ushotan's voice crackled through the emergency Vox channel that Arik had established, using hijacked palace communications. All units. All units. Directive Omega is active. Imperial forces are moving to eliminate us systematically. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Ghota's war gear was already prepared, arranged with the methodical precision of a warrior who had survived too many surprise attacks to be caught unprepared. His bolt pistol, chainsword, and the improvised explosives that Arik had constructed from medical supplies were within easy reach. The power armor that had carried him through the Unification Wars might be crude compared to what the new Astartes would wear, but it was still proof against most conventional weapons. The door to his quarters exploded inward in a shower of ceramite fragments and superheated plasma. Imperial Army stormtroopers poured through the breach, their exotic weapons cycling up with the distinctive whine of advanced energy systems. But they were facing a Thunder Warrior who had been expecting them, who had fought in close quarters against enemies that made these mortals look like children playing at war. Ghota's bolt pistol roared 3 times in rapid succession, each explosive round finding its mark with the precision that only enhanced reflexes and decades of combat experience could provide. The lead trooper's chest disappeared in a spray of gore and shattered armor. His companions had time for a single coordinated volley before the Thunder War captain was among them, his chainsword screaming as it carved through reinforced carapace and augmented flesh. The engagement lasted less than 30 seconds. When the smoke cleared, 6 Imperial soldiers lay dead, their advanced equipment proving insufficient against a warrior who had been created specifically to kill enhanced opponents. But Ghota took no satisfaction in the slaughter. These troopers were following orders, probably believing they were containing dangerous madmen rather than participating in genocide. "Ghota!" Arik's voice came through his personal Vox channel. "Section 7 is under heavy assault. Brother Captain Tyrannus is leading a fighting withdrawal toward the central assembly point, but they're taking casualties." The tactical situation was developing exactly as Ghota had expected. The Imperial forces had overwhelming numerical superiority and the advantage of prepared positions, but they were fighting Thunder Warriors on ground that the enhanced soldiers had spent days studying and preparing. Every corridor became a killing ground, every junction a potential ambush site. Moving through the palace complex toward the sounds of heaviest fighting, Ghota encountered scenes that would haunt him for whatever time he had left to live. Brother Korvac's replacement, Sergeant Thymel, had barricaded himself in a medical bay and was holding off an entire platoon of Imperial troops. His position was hopeless, surrounded, outnumbered, with ammunition running low, but he fought with the desperate fury of a warrior who knew death was inevitable but refused to make it easy. "For the Emperor!" Thymel roared as Ghota approached, the irony of the battle cry lost in the thunder of gunfire. "For Terra! For the Thunder!" The last phrase was new, something that had emerged organically among the Thunder Warriors as they realized the scope of their betrayal. They could no longer fight for the Emperor who had designed their obsolescence, could no longer serve the Imperium that sought their elimination. But they could fight for each other, for the brotherhood that had sustained them through decades of warfare. Ghota's assault on the Imperial position was a masterpiece of enhanced warrior tactics. His bolt pistol provided covering fire while he closed the distance, his power armor absorbing las blasts that would have killed unaugmented humans. His chainsword carved through the stormtroopers' formation like a scythe through wheat, each strike precisely calculated to maximize damage while conserving his own energy for the battles ahead. When the position was secure, Thymel looked up at him with eyes that held the light of fanatical determination. "They came for me during the night watch," he gasped, his enhanced physiology already beginning to heal the wounds he had suffered. "Said it was time for advanced gene therapy. When I refused, they tried to sedate me by force." "How many others?" Ghota asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "All of them," Thymel replied. "Every Thunder Warrior in this sector received summons for immediate medical treatment. Those who complied." He gestured toward the medical bay where empty surgical tables bore evidence of recent use. Those who resisted became combat problems to be solved. The scope of the betrayal was finally becoming clear. This wasn't a gradual elimination or a natural die-off accelerated by medical intervention. This was systematic extermination, carried out with military precision against warriors who had served faithfully for decades. The Thunder Warriors' defensive perimeter formed around the central assembly chamber where they had first learned of their fate. The massive space now transformed into a fortress of overturned furniture, improvised barricades, and firing positions that maximized their advantages in close-quarters combat. Nearly 3,000 survivors had fought their way to this rallying point, their ranks thinned by running battles through the palace corridors, but their determination hardened by the knowledge that retreat was impossible. Captain Ghota surveyed their defensive preparations with the tactical mind that had served him throughout the Unification Wars. Brother Captain Ushotan had positioned heavy weapons teams at key choke points, their salvaged Imperial equipment supplemented by improvised explosives that Arik's technical expertise had crafted from medical supplies and maintenance materials. The high ceiling provided excellent fields of fire for their marksmen, while the multiple entry points could be defended by overlapping kill zones. "Ammunition status?" Ghota asked, as he moved between positions, checking on warriors who had fought alongside him for decades. 17 magazines for the bolt weapons, maybe 300 last charges for the salvaged equipment," reported Sergeant Barak, his scarred face showing the strain of their desperate situation. "We've been collecting supplies from Imperial casualties, but they're not using standard patterns. Their weapons are specifically designed for fighting enhanced targets." That was the cruel irony of their situation. The Imperial forces hunting them carried equipment that had been developed using knowledge gained from decades of Thunder Warrior service. Every weapon modification, every tactical doctrine, every piece of specialized ammunition had been refined through analysis of their own capabilities and weaknesses. They were being hunted by soldiers armed with the perfect tools for killing them. "Movement on the eastern approaches," called Brother Captain Tyrannus from his observation post near the chamber's main entrance. "Full company strength, maybe more. They're bringing up heavy weapons." Through the reinforced windows, Ghota could see the Imperial forces massing for what appeared to be a final assault. Stormtroopers in specialized armor moved with the precision of veteran units, their formations supported by combat servitors and tech-adept operatives whose augmented forms bristled with exotic weaponry. Above them, automated gun servitors took position on elevated platforms, their targeting systems already painting the Thunder Warrior positions with laser designators. "They're not taking any chances," Ushotan observed grimly. "This looks like enough firepower to level a city block." But as Ghota studied the enemy deployment, he noticed something that gave him pause. The Imperial forces were moving with careful precision, but they weren't advancing. Instead, they were establishing a perimeter that seemed designed more for containment than assault. Heavy weapons teams were taking position at extreme range, their targeting solutions focused on the chamber's exits rather than the defensive positions within. "They're not planning to storm our position," he realized. "They're planning to seal us in." Arik's enhanced hearing picked up the distinctive sound of construction equipment moving through the palace corridors. "Automated construction servitors," he reported. "They're bringing up fabrication units and building materials. I think they're going to wall us in." The tactical implications were staggering. Rather than accepting the casualties that would come from a direct assault on prepared Thunder Warrior positions, the Imperial forces were simply going to seal the chamber and wait for their enemies to die of starvation or oxygen depletion. It was efficient, cost-effective, and utterly without honor. "Like animals in a cage," Tyrannus said, his voice carrying the bitter fury of a warrior who had expected to die in glorious combat. "They won't even grant us the dignity of a final battle." But Ghota's strategic mind was already working on the problem, analyzing their situation with the same methodical approach that had carried him through countless impossible battles. The chamber had multiple levels, service corridors, and access points that the Imperial forces might not have identified. More importantly, their enemies were thinking like administrators rather than warriors, focused on containment rather than the unpredictable variables that combat could introduce. "Brothers," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber with the authority that had commanded respect throughout the Unification Wars. "They think they've trapped us. They believe we'll sit here quietly while they build our tomb around us. But they've forgotten something important about Thunder Warriors." 3,000 enhanced warriors turned their attention to their self-appointed commander, their scarred faces showing the desperate hope of soldiers who had given up everything except the will to fight. "We weren't created to accept defeat," Ghota continued. "We weren't designed to die quietly in the dark. We are the Emperor's Thunder Warriors, and if this is to be our last battle, then let's remind them why they needed to replace us with something more controllable." The response came not in cheers or battle cries, but in the methodical sound of weapons being checked, equipment being distributed, and warriors preparing for an assault that would either break them free or see them die as they had lived, fighting against impossible odds for brothers who would stand beside them to the end. The assault on the gene laboratories began at 0847 hours, with Captain Ghota leading a strike force of 300 Thunder Warriors through maintenance tunnels that Arik had mapped during their confinement. The route took them beneath the Imperial perimeter, through service corridors that had been designed for automated systems rather than human passage. Enhanced warriors who stood 3 meters tall in power armor found themselves crawling through spaces barely wide enough for their massive frames, but desperation drove them forward through the darkness. "Target confirmed," Arik whispered through the tactical vox as they approached the laboratory complex. "Genetic research facility, sub-level 15. That's where they're producing the Astartes gene seed, where they've been processing our harvested genetic material." The implications were clear to every warrior in the strike force. Somewhere in those laboratories, their fallen brothers had been reduced to raw material for the Emperor's new creations. Decades of loyal service had been repaid with systematic harvesting of their enhanced organs and genetic templates. If they were going to die in this palace, at least they could strike back at the heart of the project that had made them obsolete. Brother Captain Ushotan moved beside Ghota in the cramped tunnel, his massive frame somehow finding space where none should exist. "Motion sensors ahead," he reported, his enhanced vision picking up the telltale signatures of automated security systems. "Looks like standard pattern, but the power readings are higher than normal." They were approaching the most heavily defended section of the Imperial Palace, areas that even during the height of the Unification Wars had been restricted to the highest levels of clearance. The Emperor's genetic research had always been conducted in absolute secrecy, protected by layers of security that assumed any intrusion would come from external enemies rather than his own created warriors. The first security checkpoint fell to shaped charges that Arik had constructed from medical supplies and maintenance chemicals. The explosion tore through reinforced barriers like they were made of parchment, clearing the way for Thunder Warriors, who moved with the fluid precision of veterans who had stormed 1,000 such positions. But as they advanced deeper into the complex, the resistance began to stiffen. "Contact front!" Sergeant Barak's voice carried over the sound of bolt gun fire as his squad engaged security forces in the main corridor. "These aren't regular stormtroopers. They're something else entirely." Ghota moved forward to assess the threat and found himself facing enemies unlike any he had encountered during the Unification Wars. These security operatives were clearly human in origin, but their movements showed enhancement that approached Thunder Warrior capabilities. They wore armor that integrated seamlessly with their modified physiology, and their weapons discharged energy that cut through reinforced ceramite like it was cloth. Early Astartes prototypes, Arik realized, his technical expertise allowing him to analyze their opponents, even in the midst of combat. They're using test subjects as security forces, warriors who survived the initial enhancement procedures but weren't deemed suitable for full induction into the legions. The irony was bitter beyond words. Thunder Warriors were being hunted by their own replacements, warriors who had been created using genetic knowledge extracted from captured and harvested brothers. Every tactical advantage these proto-Astartes possessed had been paid for with Thunder Warrior blood, every enhancement refined through analysis of their predecessors' physiology. But knowledge flowed both ways. Ghota's enhanced mind immediately began cataloging the weaknesses he observed in their opponent's fighting style. The proto-Astartes were stronger and faster than regular humans, but they lacked the decades of combat experience that had shaped the Thunder Warriors. Their movements were technically perfect, but predictable, their tactics drawn from training manuals rather than battlefield adaptation. They fight like they were programmed, he realized, sharing the tactical intelligence with his strike force. Perfect execution, but no improvisation, no adaptation to unexpected variables. The Thunder Warriors had been forged in the crucible of the Unification Wars, where survival depended on creative thinking and the ability to adapt to rapidly changing battlefield conditions. Their crude enhancements and unstable genetics had forced them to become tactically flexible, relying on experience and brotherhood to overcome their limitations. Fighting through the laboratory's security forces, Ghota's strike force finally reached their objective: vast chambers filled with genetic processing equipment and research apparatus that represented decades of the Emperor's work. Rows of surgical tables bore evidence of recent use, their restraint systems designed to accommodate enhanced physiology. Specimen containers lined the walls, filled with organic material that had once belonged to their fallen brothers. "Here," Arik said, his voice thick with fury as he accessed the facility's data systems. Complete genetic profiles for every Thunder Warrior who reported for medical treatment. Tissue samples, organ harvesting schedules, even psychological analysis to determine optimal processing methods. The data painted a picture of systematic exploitation that went beyond mere elimination. Thunder Warriors hadn't just been marked for death, they had been marked for complete utilization, their enhanced bodies providing raw material for the Astartes project, while their minds were analyzed to refine the psychological conditioning of their replacements. "Burn it," Ghota ordered, his voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "All of it. Let them create their perfect warriors without our sacrifice." The first Astartes encountered in combat moved with a precision that spoke of perfection, but it was a cold perfection that lacked the adaptive fury of warriors forged in desperate battle. Brother Captain Tyrannus met the Proto-Space Marines' charge in the main laboratory corridor, his chainsword screaming as it met the stranger's power weapon in a shower of sparks and ceramite fragments. The two enhanced warriors were roughly equal in size, but their fighting styles revealed fundamental differences in design philosophy. "They're fast," Tyrannus grunted through the vox as he parried a strike that would have bisected a normal human. But they fight like they're following a manual. Captain Ghota observed the engagement with the tactical analysis that had kept him alive through decades of warfare. The Astartes prototype was indeed faster and stronger than even veteran Thunder warriors, his movements enhanced by genetic modifications that their crude enhancement process couldn't match. But there was something mechanical about his attacks, a predictability that suggested extensive conditioning rather than battlefield experience. They lack our improvisation, Ghota realized, sharing the insight with his strike force through the tactical vox. They've been created for specific combat parameters. Force them outside those parameters. The Thunder warriors had learned adaptation through necessity. Their unstable genetics and crude equipment had forced them to develop tactics that relied on creativity, brotherhood, and the kind of desperate innovation that only came from facing impossible odds repeatedly. Where the Astartes fought with perfect technique, the Thunder warriors fought with perfect desperation. Brother Sergeant Arik demonstrated the difference as he engaged two proto-Astartes simultaneously in the genetic processing chamber. Rather than meeting their coordinated assault directly, he used the laboratory equipment as improvised weapons, hurling specimen containers to disrupt their formations, triggering chemical reactions that filled the air with corrosive vapors, turning the very environment into an ally. His opponent's perfect tactical training had not prepared them for combat in a laboratory that was actively being destroyed around them. "The gene seed storage!" Ushotan called out, his enhanced vision picking out the most critical targets among the research apparatus. "If we can destroy their seed stock, we set back the Astartes project by years." The gene seed chambers were protected by energy fields and automated defenses that would have stopped conventional assault forces. But Thunder warriors had never been conventional. Ghota's strike force carved through the security systems with the methodical brutality that had broken techno-barbarian strongholds across Terra. Each vault they breached contained genetic material that represented thousands of potential space marines, perfect warriors who would never exist because 300 desperate Thunder warriors had chosen to die fighting rather than quietly accept extinction. But as they pressed deeper into the facility, the resistance began to intensify. More proto-Astartes arrived, their perfect coordination and superior equipment beginning to tell despite the Thunder warriors' tactical advantages. Brother Korvac fell to a volley of bolt fire that punched through his power armor's weak points with surgical precision. Sergeant Thymel died holding a corridor junction against 5 opponents, his chainsword still screaming as his enhanced hearts finally stopped. "They're learning," Ghota observed grimly as he watched the enemy adapt to their unconventional tactics. "Each engagement teaches them something new about fighting us." The terrible irony was that the Thunder warriors were training their replacements even as they died. Every tactical innovation, every desperate improvisation, every hard-won lesson was being absorbed by opponents whose enhanced minds could process and retain information with perfect clarity. They were creating better enemies with each battle they fought. "Sir," Arik's voice carried unprecedented urgency as he accessed the facility's primary data core. "You need to see this. The legions, there are 20 of them, and they're not just prototypes anymore. They're already operational, already deployed beyond Terra." The holographic displays filled the laboratory with tactical data that made Ghota's enhanced blood run cold. 20 distinct Astartes legions, each numbering in the tens of thousands, each bearing the genetic template of a different Primarch. Beings whose very existence suggested that the Emperor's plans extended far beyond anything the Thunder warriors had imagined. The Great Crusade wasn't a distant dream. It was already beginning, with Space Marine forces engaging alien civilizations on dozens of different worlds. "We're not just obsolete," Ghota realized. "We're already forgotten. The galaxy is being conquered by our replacements, while we die in the basement of the palace we built. But even in that moment of terrible understanding, Arik's technical expertise provided one final revelation. "The Primarchs," he said, his voice filled with something that might have been hope. "The genetic templates for the Legion Masters, they're not here. They're scattered, lost, hidden somewhere beyond Terra's system." The implications struck Ghota like lightning. If the Primarchs were missing, if the Emperor's perfect generals for his galactic conquest were not available to lead the legions, then perhaps the Thunder Warriors' sacrifice could still serve a purpose. Perhaps their desperate resistance could buy time for something to go wrong with the Great Crusade, some flaw in the Emperor's grand design that would vindicate their existence. "Burn it all," he ordered again. But now the command carried different weight. They weren't just destroying the evidence of their exploitation. They were striking a blow against the future that sought to erase them from history. The Emperor arrived without fanfare, his presence announced only by the sudden cessation of weapons fire and the overwhelming psychic pressure that filled the gene laboratory like a physical force. Captain Ghota felt his enhanced nervous system respond to that familiar aura of absolute authority, the genetic conditioning built into every Thunder Warrior compelling recognition of their creator, even as his rational mind catalogued the Master of Mankind as their executioner. The remaining Thunder Warriors, perhaps 50 survivors from the 300 who had begun the assault, formed a defensive line among the burning ruins of the research facility. Around them, decades of genetic research burned in chemical fires that filled the air with toxic smoke. The gene seed storage vaults lay in ruins, their precious contents scattered across the laboratory floor like scattered pearls. Whatever the cost of this final gesture, they had struck back at the heart of the project that had made them obsolete. "My Thunder Warriors," the Emperor said, his voice carrying easily across the chamber despite the ongoing fires and collapsing equipment. "You have served well. You have exceeded every parameter I designed into your genetic template." Ghota stepped forward, his bolt pistol trained on the figure who had created and condemned him in equal measure. At this range, even an explosive bolt might not be sufficient to harm the Master of Mankind. But the gesture itself carried meaning that transcended tactical effectiveness. "We know what you are," Ghota said, his enhanced voice cutting through the smoke and flame. "We know what you made us to be. Weapons with built-in obsolescence, prototypes designed to fail so you could justify our replacement." The Emperor's golden eyes seemed to look through him, seeing patterns and possibilities that mortal minds could never comprehend. "You were necessary," he replied, his tone carrying neither apology nor regret. "The unification required warriors who could be created quickly, deployed immediately, and accepted without question that their service would be temporary. You were precisely what Terra needed during its darkest hour. And now, Terra needs something better," Brother Captain Ushotan said, his scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile. Something more stable, more controllable, more perfectly suited to conquest rather than liberation. "The galaxy is vast," the Emperor explained, as if lecturing students rather than facing armed rebellion. "The Great Crusade will span centuries, require warriors who can adapt to alien environments and Xenos threats that Terra has never faced. The Astartes possess capabilities that your genetic template could never achieve." Around them, the surviving Thunder Warriors maintained their defensive positions with the disciplined precision that had carried them through the Unification Wars. But Ghota could see the cost of their final battle written in their postures: ammunition running low, power armor systems failing, enhanced physiology pushed beyond sustainable limits. They had perhaps minutes before their position became untenable. "You could have told us the truth," Arik said, his technical expertise allowing him to continue monitoring the facility's destruction even while facing the Emperor. "You could have offered us the dignity of knowing our fate, of choosing how we met our end." "Truth," the Emperor repeated, the word carrying bitter irony. The truth is that humanity teeters on the edge of extinction, surrounded by threats that make the techno-barbarians of Terra look like children playing with toys. The truth is that every decision I make, every sacrifice I demand, every betrayal I orchestrate, serves the singular purpose of ensuring that our species survives to claim its destiny among the stars. The master of mankind gestured toward the burning laboratory around them, his expression showing neither anger nor disappointment at their destruction. This facility can be rebuilt. The gene seed can be replaced. The research you have destroyed represents perhaps 6 months of delay in Legion deployment schedules. Inconvenient, but not catastrophic. Then why are you here? Ghota asked, though part of him already suspected the answer. Because you deserve to understand, the Emperor replied. Because warriors who have served with such distinction should not die believing they were betrayed. You were not betrayed. You were fulfilled. Every battle you fought, every victory you achieved, every brother who fell beside you served the greater purpose of preparing humanity for galactic conquest. The words struck deeper than any weapon could have managed. Ghota felt the terrible weight of understanding settle over him as he realized the scope of the Emperor's vision. The Thunder Warriors hadn't been discarded because they were failures. They had been discarded because they were successes, their purpose complete, and their continued existence a liability to plans that spanned millennia. The Astartes will conquer the galaxy, the Emperor continued. They will bring the Imperial truth to 10,000 worlds and unite humanity under a single banner. But they will do so standing on the foundation you built, using knowledge gained through your sacrifice, carrying within their perfect genetics the lessons learned from your imperfect service. A foundation built on lies, Ghota said, though the words lacked the fury he had expected to feel. A foundation built on necessity, the Emperor corrected. You were told you served the Imperium, and you did. You were told you fought for humanity's future, and you did. The fact that your individual futures were always intended to be brief does not diminish the truth of your service. The final moments came with a dignity that surprised them all. Captain Ghota looked around at his surviving brothers, 43 Thunder Warriors who had chosen defiance over quiet extinction, who had burned the laboratories and scattered the gene seed rather than accept their fate with passive obedience. Their power armor was scorched and failing, their ammunition nearly exhausted, their enhanced physiology pushed beyond sustainable limits. But they stood ready to meet death as they had lived, as weapons in service of something greater than themselves. You offer us understanding, Ghota said to the Emperor, his bolt pistol still trained on the master of mankind, though they both knew the futility of the gesture. But understanding changes nothing. We are still marked for elimination. The Astartes still require our deaths to secure their legitimacy. The Emperor nodded, his golden eyes reflecting something that might have been respect. The galaxy will know that the Space Marines were created to surpass all previous attempts at human enhancement. They will not know that their perfection was built upon the sacrifice of the Thunder Warriors who came before them. History will forget us, Brother Captain Ushatan observed, his scarred face showing neither bitterness nor regret. The Chronicles of the Great Crusade will speak of Astartes' victories, Primarch glory, and the Emperor's vision of galactic unity. But they will not speak of the warriors who made it all possible. History serves the needs of the present, the Emperor replied. The truth of your existence, of your service, of your sacrifice, these things will be preserved in ways that matter. Every Space Marine who draws breath carries within him the genetic knowledge gained through your creation. Every victory they achieve validates the necessity of what you have endured. Brother Sergeant Arik managed something that might have been laughter, though it came out as a rasping sound through his damaged Vox grill. Practical immortality through genetic integration. I suppose there are worse fates for soldiers who were designed to be forgotten. Around them, the gene laboratory continued to burn with chemical fires that filled the air with acrid smoke. The destruction they had wrought would indeed set back the Astartes project, but not catastrophically. New facilities would be built, new gene seed cultivated, new research conducted to refine the enhancement process further. The Thunder Warriors' final gesture of defiance would be reduced to a footnote in classified reports, their sacrifice measured in production delays rather than heroic resistance. But as Ghota studied the Emperor's face, he began to understand that their rebellion had served a purpose beyond mere destruction. The Master of Mankind had come here personally, had taken time from his galactic planning to face the warriors he had condemned. That suggested something more complex than simple cleanup of a security problem. You needed this, Ghota realized. You needed us to resist, to fight back, to force a confrontation, not for the tactical value, but for the psychological necessity. The Emperor's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, revealing depths of calculation that made Ghota's enhanced mind struggle to process the implications. The Astartes must believe themselves to be humanity's ultimate warriors, perfect in every aspect. But perfection achieved without struggle, without overcoming opposition, creates arrogance rather than humility. They needed to know that their predecessors died fighting rather than simply fading away. The terrible beauty of the plan became clear. Even their rebellion had been anticipated, perhaps even engineered through careful manipulation of information and opportunity. The Emperor had allowed them to discover the truth, had provided them with the means to strike back, had orchestrated this final confrontation to serve psychological needs that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. "You bastard," Ushotan said, but the words carried admiration rather than anger. "Even our defiance serves your purposes. Even our deaths will be used to shape the mentality of our replacements. The Astartes will know that they were created to surpass warriors who chose death over dishonor," the Emperor confirmed. "They will carry within them the understanding that their perfection was earned through the sacrifice of imperfect predecessors who fought to the end rather than accepting quiet extinction." Ghota felt something like peace settle over his enhanced consciousness as he finally understood the full scope of what they had been part of. The Thunder Warriors had never been intended as permanent solutions. They had been stepping stones, necessary components in a process that spanned centuries and required multiple generations of enhanced warriors. Their creation, their service, their degradation, and even their final rebellion had all served the greater purpose of preparing humanity for galactic conquest. "Then let's give them something worthy to surpass," he said, raising his bolt pistol not toward the Emperor, but toward the ceiling above them. "Brothers, for the thunder!" The response came from 43 voices raised in unison, the battle cry that had echoed across Terra during the bloodiest years of the Unification Wars. They had been the Emperor's first superhuman warriors, the prototype upon which all future enhancements would be based. Now they would die as they had lived, together, defiant, and absolutely committed to the greater good of humanity's future among the stars. The end came not with explosions or fanfare, but with a quiet dignity that surprised everyone present. Captain Ghota lowered his bolt pistol and looked one final time at his surviving brothers, warriors who had given everything to the Emperor's vision, and asked for nothing in return except the honor of serving alongside each other. Their power armor was failing, their enhanced physiology pushed beyond all sustainable limits, but their spirits remained unbroken. Brother Captain Ushotan stepped forward, his massive frame somehow finding grace despite the damage it had sustained. "Master," he said, addressing the Emperor with the formal courtesy that had been drilled into them during their earliest training, "we request permission to die as Thunder Warriors rather than as failed experiments." The Emperor studied them with eyes that seemed to contain the weight of 10,000 years of planning. "What would you ask of me?" "Let us choose our end," Ghota replied. "We have served faithfully, fought courageously, and accepted truths that would have broken lesser warriors. Grant us the dignity of warriors' deaths rather than medical termination." Around them, the gene laboratory burned with fires that cast dancing shadows on the walls. The research that had cost so many Thunder Warrior lives lay in ruins, but already Ghota could hear the sound of construction servitors beginning cleanup operations. The Emperor's plans would continue regardless of their gesture. New facilities would be built, new gene seed cultivated, new space marines created to carry the Imperial banner to distant stars. But perhaps that was enough. Perhaps the knowledge that they had mattered, that their existence had contributed to something greater than themselves, was sufficient legacy for warriors who had never expected to be remembered by history. "Very well," the Emperor said, and there was something in his voice that suggested genuine respect. "You have earned the right to choose your ending." Brother Sergeant Arik activated his remaining demolition charges with the technical precision that had served him throughout the Unification Wars. The explosives he had crafted from medical supplies and maintenance chemicals would bring down this section of the laboratory complex, ensuring that their final sacrifice would at least inconvenience the forces that sought to erase them from memory. 60 seconds, he reported through the tactical vox, his voice carrying the calm professionalism of a warrior who had found peace with his fate. The Thunder Warriors formed a final circle, their battered armor and scarred faces bearing witness to decades of service in humanity's darkest conflicts. They had broken the techno-barbarian tribes, had cleansed the gene cults from Terra's wastelands, had united a fractured world under the Imperial banner. Now they would die together as they had lived, as brothers bound by shared purpose and mutual sacrifice. "It has been an honor," Ghota said, his words carrying across the circle with the authority that had commanded respect throughout the Unification Wars. "We are the Thunder Warriors. We were the Emperor's first super soldiers, and we have served with distinction." "The Emperor protects," Ushotan added, though the traditional blessing carried new meaning now. "And sometimes the Emperor requires sacrifice." The Emperor himself stepped back, his golden aura seeming to dim as he prepared to witness the end of his first experiment in human enhancement. "You will be remembered," he said, and for the first time in their conversation, his voice carried what might have been genuine emotion. "Not in the official histories, not in the chronicles of the Great Crusade, but in the genetic legacy that will carry humanity to the stars." 30 seconds, Arik reported. Through the smoke and flame, Ghota could see Imperial forces taking position outside the laboratory complex. Astartes prototypes and regular troops alike prepared to secure the area once the explosions cleared the way. They would find bodies, wreckage, and the burned remnants of research that had taken decades to accumulate. But they would also find proof that the Thunder Warriors had died as warriors rather than victims. "Brothers," Ghota said, raising his voice above the sound of approaching demolition. "We have been the bridge between humanity's past and its future. Our bodies will fail, our names will be forgotten, but our purpose will live on in every space marine who claims the galaxy in the Emperor's name." 10 seconds, Arik called out. The Thunder Warriors stood ready to meet death with the same courage that had carried them through 1,000 impossible battles. They had been flawed creations, prototypes with built-in obsolescence and unstable genetics. But they had also been heroes, warriors who had sacrificed everything for the promise of humanity's future among the stars. "For the Thunder!" they cried in unison, their voices rising above the countdown as the charges reached critical sequence. The explosion that followed would be recorded in Imperial archives as a containment failure, a tragic accident that claimed the lives of the last Thunder Warrior rebels and required extensive reconstruction of the gene research facilities. But those who witnessed it would remember something different: the sight of humanity's first super soldiers choosing to die with dignity rather than accepting quiet extinction. In the aftermath of fire and falling stone, as construction servitors cleared the wreckage and new laboratories rose from the ruins, the Thunder Warriors passed into legend, or perhaps more accurately, into deliberate obscurity. The official histories would speak of the Space Marine Legions as humanity's first enhanced warriors, their creation a triumph of Imperial science and the Emperor's vision. The crude prototypes who had made their perfection possible would be erased from memory, their sacrifice deemed necessary for the greater narrative of human ascendancy. But in the gene forges beneath the Imperial Palace, where new Astartes drew their first augmented breaths, something of the Thunder Warriors lived on. Every Space Marine carried within his enhanced physiology the lessons learned from those who came before. The knowledge of what worked, what failed, and what prices had to be paid for superhuman capability. Their genetic legacy would spread across the galaxy with the Great Crusade, touching every world that felt the tread of power-armored boots and heard the thunder of bolt weapons in righteous fury. The Primarchs, when they were eventually recovered from their scattered exile, would lead legions that owed their existence to warriors they would never know existed. The greatest heroes of the Great Crusade would achieve victories built upon foundations laid by soldiers whose names had been deliberately forgotten. Each triumph would validate the necessity of the Thunder Warriors' sacrifice. Each conquest would justify the brutal pragmatism that had marked them for extinction. Captain Ghota and his brothers had understood this truth in their final moments, that their value lay not in individual recognition, but in collective purpose. They had been the crude instruments that shaped the refined weapons of humanity's future. Their flawed genetics had provided the data necessary to create stable enhancements. Their tactical failures had informed the training doctrines that would make Space Marines unstoppable. Even their final rebellion had served the Emperor's designs, creating a psychological framework that would ensure the Astartes understood the weight of their responsibility. In the end, perhaps that was enough. The Thunder Warriors had been created to serve, and they had served perfectly, not just as weapons of war, but as stepping stones to something greater. Their deaths had meaning because their lives had purpose, and their sacrifice would echo through 10,000 years of Imperial history in ways that transcended individual memory. The Great Crusade began 6 months later than originally planned, delayed by the need to rebuild research facilities and replace destroyed gene seed stocks. But when the Space Marine Legions finally took to the void, they carried within them the accumulated wisdom of every Thunder Warrior who had ever lived and died in service to the Imperial dream. They were perfect warriors, unmarred by the genetic instabilities that had doomed their predecessors, blessed with lifespans that could endure centuries of warfare. They were everything the Thunder Warriors had been created to make possible, and in the darkness between stars, where only the Emperor's vision could penetrate, that was victory enough for warriors who had never asked to be remembered, only to serve, to fight, and to die with dignity when their purpose was complete. The Emperor protects, and sometimes protection requires forgetting those who made it possible. But the thunder echoes still, in every bolt shell fired in righteousness, in every enemy broken by superhuman strength, in every world brought into the light of Imperial truth. The Thunder Warriors live on, not in history, but in legacy, the hidden foundation upon which humanity's galactic empire would rise. The Emperor protects. More stories await.